I just wanted to welcome you to my podcast, Soma Says. And I'm really intrigued the connection that we have because it's the first time that I'm actually hosting a guest to talk about healthcare and AI and specifically women's health. And I've been trying to gather more guests from different realms, not just physicians, talking about AI and healthcare because I think it's going to take us by a storm. And it already is in many ways. So tell us about yourself and how you came to found this company, Health Engine.
Thank you so much, Soma, for having me here today. I cannot stress enough whenever I'm speaking to people such as you, the importance of AI and healthcare. And I'm sure we'll get to that, but I really appreciate you taking your time to speak to me and raise awareness about this important topic. So I'd like to take you back to a time where it all began. Health Engine is a personal project for me, which started as a girl who was diagnosed with PCOS almost 20 years back. But before my diagnosis came through, I battled through series of irregular cycles, fatigue, mood swings, and I didn't find comfort in any diagnosis or anything that my doctors were saying. And even when the diagnosis came through that, Shalvi, you have PCOS, it's a lifestyle disease, I didn't find any comfort around what should I do now. All I received was a prescription with pills mentioned, and I had to consume them for the rest of my life until my periods were regular. Now, the thing that does to a 12-year-old is you have no line of sight on where that goes, whether it'll ever get better. And all the emotional turmoil and mental fatigue that comes with it just gets ignored. So as a small town girl who lived in India for the most part of her life, I feel like it was a battle that I had to choose for myself. And once I grew up and I got the exposure to meet different women across the world, is when I realized that while you're alone in the journey, there are so many women who have faced exactly the same thing. And that's exactly the topic that I've tried to address in a book, which I'm writing, which is soon to be published. I have spoken to a couple of publishing houses, and it's a topic that I'm really passionate about, which is around PCOS itself and the journey of it, the science of it, but also from an emotional angle on how a girl who's young gets diagnosed with a disease like that or a condition like that has to navigate through along the process. So that was the building block of Health Engine. And then I finally gave it shape almost around in 2021 when I felt like I have the skill set now to give the technological background to the science of it, which I had been reading for the last 20 years in all capacity.
So it's interesting because you and I are both Indian, right? My parents emigrated to the US a long time ago. I was born and brought up here. But we're referring to basically, even though you were in India, to Western medicine, right? You were diagnosed as a child with PCOS. And it sounds like you were probably given oral contraceptives, estrogen, progesterone combination, which in my opinion, is a little too early to start at that age. But that's my opinion. I'm talking medical opinion. I'm not talking about anything in terms of ethics or morality here. And it sounds like you felt very confused and lost in that whole situation.
The standard protocol in India, and it still stands true because I have the privilege of working with different gynecologists in India back home as well. I come from a family of doctors. There is a gynecologist who's also a relative who's one of the leading doctors from the Max Healthcare Hospital back in India. And I keep on talking to what is the prescriptive medicine for anyone who's diagnosed with the condition. Very skeptical of where that is going, especially in developing marginalized communities. I was given, as you mentioned, contraceptive pills as the only solution to regularize my periods. And as someone who's worked in this field, you would realize that it is not a preemptive action, A. B, it is not the kind of medicine you prescribe to young girls if the only thing that helps you with is basically give you an induced period, and that doesn't help with the condition itself. So I feel like, to answer your question, A, it is definitely not advised, in my opinion, to give that with whatever limited medical interactions I've had. And B, I also very strongly believe that if it is a reactive protocol to just react to a part of the condition and not the condition as a whole, let alone all the side effects that come with contraceptives, and probably we'll get to that or not. It just doesn't give you a line of sight on what the treatment really is. If you miss your periods for 3 months, you take oral contraceptives, which is the standard protocol, and you just give estrogen and progesterone medicines, as you mentioned. And I was on them for a very long time, almost about 10 years, after which I got to realize, and I was told that shouldn't have been the case. Like what it did to my body or what it could have done to my body was so unknown. There needs to be more standard protocol or early detection mechanisms to put forth what can be done better for women who go through it.
I think having studied medicine in this country, but having straddled both sides of the fence and having been to India many times and witnessing times when, whether it was my family back then interacting with doctors, or even now, for example, with other family members who are in India at this time, my impression with India still, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I am making a judgment here, is that doctors are still viewed as the boss of the whole situation. It's a very patriarchal kind of relationship. They write out in the handwriting that you can't even make out what they're writing. And I often get a lot of questions from my relatives on WhatsApp. What does this mean? And several times I can't even make out what the doctor has written. And I myself am a physician. So it's almost like they don't know what's going on. There's 10 or 12 different medications that are listed that they should be taking, which is absurd to me. I'm like, why would anyone take 10 or 12 medications? Maybe after I go through all of them, I'm like, okay, you could take this one. This might help, but I don't think you need all the other ones. So my impression is, and I'm not saying all doctors are like this in India, but my impression is that even in India, people often come back very confused. And here, I think it's changing a bit because I think people are taking the power back into their own hands. And there's the internet and there's AI and people are educating themselves. And depending on how much exposure you have to medicine, I think people do a lot of deep dives into figuring out what's right or wrong and asking questions. And that's what I support because I don't feel comfortable being the one who says, okay, you're going to do A, B, C, and D. And this is it, and there's no questions. That's not necessarily what is the right script for a healthy outcome. People should be understanding what's happening in their bodies, what the potential side effects of medications are, what the alternatives could be. But it doesn't sound like that was your experience at that time. So I'm going to go back to my first question when I asked you about Health Engine. And how did that inspire you to move forward and develop your company? And did you delve into the sciences? Did you decide, okay, I'm going to go into health tech right away? What was your journey like?
I wanted to be a doctor for the most part of my life, up until I would say when I joined my undergrad college, which was an engineering field. You must be aware of the average Indian household where the only two options that are given to a kid. Landscape is changing quite a bit now, but back in my time, it was either you can become a doctor or an engineer. My family was a family of doctors, so that seemed practical. And I was always intrigued by the sciences of all of it. But I also did really well in my math test in my 10th board exam, which is apparently just the test you take pre-undergrad. So I was confused on the line I should take. And honestly, it was just a flip hand decision on, I should do engineering because it's making more ROI sense. I'll get a better job, I'll earn better. But once I joined engineering is when I realized I am still so passionate about medical sciences in general. I would read all the journals, all the books that my dad would bring back from his conferences. And I was particularly intrigued and interested about knowing more about PCOS and PCOD. My ninth standard that I actually got to know the difference through my reading that PCOS and PCOD are different terms of not the same thing. One is just a syndrome, but when you qualify 1, 2, 3 criteria of the syndrome is when you're diagnosed with the disease itself. If you have multiple cysts in your ovaries, it doesn't mean you have PCOS. Right. Things like that. I also started reading a lot about the dietary aspect of it. I did read a lot of journals that were published in Google Scholarly articles and a couple of other places on the research that the US was also doing on the topic back in 2014, 2015. But I didn't find enough resources to give me a lot of proactive markers to tell someone, you're approaching PCOS, it's almost PCOS. So there's a genetic part of it, but there's also a lifestyle part of it. And how do you succumb to not becoming that person who's already gotten it and now reacting to it. So I feel like that was the area that intrigued me the most. I didn't have any idea of AI or the technology of it, but creating something which could be a safe space, a community for different women to discuss. And from their experiences, someone who's just started getting their periods could take over and build a lifestyle that helps them probably stay away from conditions that is not very healthy. But that was the start of it. And then come the time when I completed my college, I got married to the man I love the most in the world. And then finally, we moved to the States. I was told constantly back in India that I will never be able to naturally conceive. And that was the thought that I came to the US with, that once I plan my conception, I'll have to plan everything around it, probably be on pills, go for IVF and whatnot, because my body is not fit for natural conception. And it was during this time that I started reading the science of how can one naturally conceive if you have XYZ. To get into the technical details of it, like my FSH into LH ratio used to always be off the charts. And I would focus on that. What are the food items I can eat to make that better? Or are there things that can help me detect my LH surge, which is not typical to a normal individual who's having a 28-day cycle? So in my case, I would get periods almost once every 3 to 4 months. And sometimes when I'm more stressed, it would reach to the 6-month level. So I could understand the reaction that my body was giving when I was more stressed, as someone who was an ambitious woman in this today's age when, you love working, you want to do better for yourself. But at the same time, the stress peaks would make my irregularity go worse. So those things I was just reading more on. And then I was introduced to the world of AI in my master's. So I did my MBA from Lehigh University in business analytics and AI concentration. So the first project that I picked up for myself was around women's health and can there be any technology to do some proactive study and biomarker level intervention to tell people these are the things they could avoid or maybe take better care of themselves. So I was reading this concept of twin health, which is not only for women's like fertility related issues, but in general, you create a digital twin to emulate how your body functions. Like what are its highs and lows? When does it feel better? When does it feel worse? And stuff like that. And eventually that concept is something that I started writing about in a journal, an environment using science, tech, and AI to get to the answer of it. And then eventually when I started building agentic AI models along with a couple of friends of mine is when I realized that it could come to fruition. And this was back in 2022. The idea was always there in me, but I would say that to be able to combine technology into the science of it was the biggest challenge. And I feel like now we are slowly getting there where our current product, or the beta product as we like to call it, is almost there where we could comfortably say that it will solve the solution of proactive, preventive PCOS detection.
As a women's health doctor, whether it's PCOS or perimenopause or menopause, I just feel like we go through these phases in our lives. And obviously not all women have PCOS, but we do go through perimenopause and menopause, and that's like our universal connection. It just depends on what age it is. But it's often met with confusion. And even for me, I often have to meet or talk to a patient several times before we decide, okay, this is likely perimenopause or it's not, or maybe it's something else going on. So I find this so fascinating, but educate us as to how your company.
Thank you for that great question, Soma. And I am often sent that question from prospective clients who are talking to me about using our solution. Honestly, the way I look at it is traditional medicine, and you can correct me if you disagree with me or you feel that's wrong. What our solution tries to do in a lot of ways is it looks at soft, subtle changes in body's overall markers, which are not necessarily lab-driven or end marker-driven. Those could be things like temperature in your body shifts or something like feeling off. So your emotional well-being with your body temperature, your basal temperature, how you feel about everything else around it, sensitivity in skin, small as temperature shifts in your body regularly, to your skin barriers and sensitivity changing, to your basal temperature, all of this data which are very precursor data to the final endpoint of, hey, I missed a period in terms of PCOS, or for perimenopause, let's say I have a missed period plus I don't feel well. So Mood swings, feeling off are all emotional markers. And then there are some precursor markers, as we like to call them, which kind of all get fed into our data model, which speaks to our agentic AI. And then it builds a model around a personalized red alert for you to say, this is the time for you to wake up and start looking at your body differently. Probably you're going through the age of perimenopausal time frame. And I often get this question of like, how do I differentiate between, am I just not feeling well? Am I just too exhausted because I have to take care of my house and everything else? Or is really an approaching menopause, which I should be wary of? And I think that's where the emotional plus your body markers giving you signals combine to tell you this is an alert. It's not to say that errors won't happen there as well. I feel like with all the data we have gathered so far, it seems like these small areas where body does speak back to you are red alert areas to detect and say you are approaching perimenopause and you should start acting towards. Go take your first lab test and do it, as opposed to wait for the end game and not be prepared.
One question I have for you, and I think this is fascinating, and I'm already thinking of all sorts of ideas of how we can work together. That's just how I am. It's thinking, like, the next step.
I was just telling my partner, my biggest P in life right now, as much as I love periods, is partnership. Any offer that comes in that direction, I'm happy to hear, listen, and
so how would this work? Would you have your consumers using an app, or is it, and I looked through your website, I know you are planning to partner with, it sounds like different clinicians maybe and EMRs, but how would it all work?
So the workings are pretty simple. Right now, you won't get a lot of information on our website because the data that we are collecting is so confidential that we have a consent process with the select few people that we have brought into the beta. I want to make sure that the machine is learning the right things, because the last thing I want is to be sued on something that. But having said that, I think the way it would work eventually when it's open for the public is you download an app which will start asking for different formats of data. For example, you have a wearable generally, which is an Apple Watch or whatever, but that's just tracking your heart rate and it's not giving you any prescriptive information. What we are doing is we are partnering with wearables as well. A wearable will show our app, but that could exist on your phone, similar to any heart rate detector or monitor app. Same goes for us. Our app would be on your phone, but it could also be embedded in a wearable and it will detect better. But it's detecting basically your sleep patterns, your heart rate, your temperature, your body temperature changes. And then there is a section where it asks explicitly for you to give some data. For example, there's an emotional blockade where you give lots of markers around, today I didn't feel good. My mood was upset because of such and such reason. I haven't gotten my period for XYZ period. Those are textual data that has to be filled by the concerned person itself. And then there are like your body biomarkers and precursors that are coming through while wearing or holding your phone, as simple as your heart rate changes, your mood changes, your sleep pattern changes. We also have a detector that's also in beta, but it's in launch V2 that I want to launch soon. Similar to an LH monitor or a basal temperature monitor, we have a monitor which measures your basal temperature, but it's not too invasive. So it's similar to like you pee on the cup, and that with the measurement of how hot your pee was, it is able to gauge the range of your basal temperature. And if it's frequently changing, it gets fed into the system. Otherwise, we don't even hold that data. So that way, only when it's a marker to be included into your profiling is when it gets included. And then an entire personified profile is built. With that profile, you start getting alerts on you're in the red zone, green zone, yellow zone. If you're in the yellow zone, you're asked to take XYZ lab test to confirm where you're going. And then accordingly, we also have a community page where how you're feeling, depending on like where you are in the journey, you can be part of that particular community, which is dedicated. Like some of the communities currently we have, nothing against them, but they are too generic. And it's the same forum which is discussing women who have already gotten pregnant to women who are discussing how do I get pregnant. And I feel like that's not very safe space for people to see those discussions. So we have just created out the communities. That's an initiative I've taken separately. And on top of that, we're also giving these personalized care plans on this is how you eat better. So I'm also partnering with a couple of nutritionists as we speak. So we better up people's nutrition and diet plans as they go along the way. But again, once it's been detected, that's when we give it to our clinicians to take it ahead in terms of your lab reports. We don't want to, there's no way and intention, and I don't think it's even possible or even thought around to take over the diagnosis plus care part of it. Once it's been detected, it's just that it is detection plus prescription on how you should better up your life and then move it ahead.
And are you going to have separate groups, support groups, for example, women who have PCOS or women who are trying to get pregnant or the perimenopausal, menopausal phases? Are they going to be different groups?
Absolutely. You hit the nail. I think I'm going as granular as women in PCOS who face hirsutism, separate group than women facing irregular periods.
Yeah.
That's so different that the concerns and the challenges are completely off. That came from the idea that I speak to a lot of women who have had PCOS, but their own journey was so different because of what they faced. Like, for example, I've never had an acne because of PCOS. So I cannot possibly relate with another PCOS patient who's really screaming on how their struggles with body image issues or acne has been. But weight fluctuation was my issue. Irregular periods was my issue. My friends talking about how, again, their periods have come and I'm not being part of that conversation because I have missed it for the last 6 months. Not feeling female enough is an issue. So I feel like the buckets are very granular in my community. And I'm just trying to make sure I separate that out, especially as you go towards detection. So once you're in the red zone of detection of, let's say, you seem like you have PCOS, go check with a doctor and get it diagnosed. But you also be part of this community now because A, you were unaware that you might have PCOS. And now there are different women who have different problems that you can identify with and then join that support group to say what has helped them, apart from a nutrition plan that is, again, coming from a third-party provider that we've partnered with.
And from a clinical sense, like how do you get the clinical advice when it comes to all these different conditions? Do you work with doctors, nurses that help guide you with all of this?
Yes. So what I'm doing is right now I have 2 partnerships pending. There's an NDA that I would be signing almost about next week, fingers crossed. So basically these partnerships with clinics is similar to how, I don't know if you've seen companies such as Maven or Progeny. They just have, so I'm just a platform that is including clinics. There's no telemedicine aspect of it as well. There is just support in terms of email and chat, similar to what clinic already give to their patients. I am just an API integration in technical terms. But this partnership also means that they can have access to multiple clinics through our platform. And then because the clinics are already, like, you can also see your benefits plan in terms of like your insurance provider, whether it's a in-network, off-network, all of those things, which is simply something that is coming directly from the clinic and I've integrated in my platform. So people have a one-stop shop. So I have a pre-diagnosis, I have a community to share things with, I have a nutrition plan, and now I have X clinics to search from. This is the kind of provider I have in my network benefiting clinic for me. And then that clinic takes over. Even schedule your first appointment through our system. But post that, it's the clinic system that takes. So we just allow the first appointment, create the bridge.
But do you plan to be partnering with any insurances on this, or will it just be cash only?
That's a great question. It's definitely on the cards. In all honesty, I have a 5-year plan, which is obviously dependent on the success of our beta and stuff like that. Going forward, I definitely would like to partner with a couple of insurance providers, especially on the trying to conceive community who are struggling with PCOS and trying to conceive as well. Because I feel like the benefits plan in that area is very haphazard. It's too costly a regime for people to get into. And companies, in more cases than not, corporates do not fund that end to end. So it all depends on your insurance provider. And there is a lot of coding and backforthing that goes there. I'm still in the education stage of it. But that's definitely in the plan to partner with more providers and get people more access as well. Access doesn't really only mean getting them access to clinics, but also access to funding their overall clinical journey as well.
I think what you have developed will only open the door wider. And it's still surprising to me when I have patients who come to me and say, and I'm not the knowledgeable person about every single medical condition in this world, because there are times when I need to educate myself if I'm not well rehearsed on something, and I'm the first one to tell the patient, like, I don't know enough and I'll need to do my due diligence on that. I'll share with you that I was training at a time when the Women's Health Initiative kicked in. And so that was when I had maybe, I'm not kidding you, maybe a month or 2 of exposure to hormone replacement, and then it stopped. So as a young physician, someone out of training and practicing forward, it was taboo to put women on HRT. Why? Because at that time, and we even knew at that time, that study was flawed in some ways. I'm not saying everything was bad about the study, but there was some flaws. And we knew that, but we still decided that's how it was going to be because that was the trend. So I think companies such as yours, it just makes knowledge much more widespread, not just for patients, but for doctors. Because if a patient can come and say, I've used this app, I've used this service, and it's telling me that I may be in perimenopause or I have PCOS, then it just gives them a lot more fuel, a lot more evidence to say, I'd like to talk about this more. And it gives us more of that impetus to listen to people. That's what I hope, at least. So if someone was listening to you, and whether it's PCOS or if it's, let's talk about perimenopause, because most perimenopausal women, they're moms, they're working, they're juggling maybe an aging parent, they're not sleeping well, they have a lot of stress for various reasons, and they come in and they may even be having regular cycles, but they're exhausted and they're irritable. What would you say to them?
I would simply say that trust your gut because your symptoms are real. Our platform can help you track and interpret your symptoms better. You will have answers in a data recorded manner in terms of what you've been feeling for the last few weeks or months. But at the same time, the first step is to listen to your body. I think that's a journey I have battled with, and now I can know when my body speaks something to me. I can know when something is off. And I won't take no for an answer. Nobody can talk me through saying, oh, it's just a phase, or you're just a teenager, you're just a mom and you're feeling off. Even issues with emotional well-being that come through for a woman who's struggling with, let's say, some of the other issues of perimenopause as well, are because of something that's happening inside your body. And I just want to make sure that we always are able to establish the connection between the two. I would always tell women to always trust their gut and instinct. Do not think you're imagining anything. And if you're feeling off in any way, be it exhaustion or you're scared or wondering if you're hitting menopause, I think it's always good to figure out the why. And we as Health Engine are here to help you do that. And I would really appreciate if people start collating and using our information to make sure they understand themselves better.
What would your product be called? Would it be named after your company, or is that something that you can't share at this time?
I decided the name of the product only 3 weeks back. I was always going to call it Health Engine, in all honesty, but something clicked differently as we were testing. So I would like to keep that confidential for now because it's still in the beta, but it's not the same. It's not the same as Health Engine.
And when do you project that it will be out for people to use?
To be honest, the initial results are quite humbling. It's good, but we have enough data to work through as well. And our AI model with that limited data set is giving us good answers, but it's still not in the range I would like or be comfortable rolling out to the audiences. The good thing with AI is it learns with more data and it keeps on bettering itself. I can see the difference between yesterday and today. That's how quickly AI learns. So I'm hoping with all the data we are churning and with all the learning that's happening that probably next quarter, almost about end of June, early July is when we can hit the market. But there are other moving parts, such as some of the partnerships I'm discussing with the providers. And I would like to launch all at once, at least so I don't have to repeat things in multiple phases. The way I have thought of our phasal approach in the 2-year, 3-year plan is we would like to refresh things every 6 months, depending on whatever we are bringing on the platform. And phase 1 is something I want to make sure at least our basic partnerships are in place and in line. So all put together, I'm hoping July launch, but trust.
Yeah, keep me posted. Definitely let me know when it's coming out so that I can follow along. And I was not joking about partnering with you. With AI, and I'm both a doctor as well as a patient. And AI, whether you accept it or not, it's here and it's taking over in all sorts of ways. And I'll be honest with you, as a doctor, at times it can be scary for me to see how fast it works. But one of my concerns, and maybe you can talk about this, how does your company plan on protecting patient information, obviously keeping HIPAA? All of these are concerns for patients.
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant question. As a person, the corporate side, I have worked with privacy of many e-commerce companies, so I understand the importance of it. All I can say without revealing too much right now is that the health data of any patient is sacred. It is as sacred as anything you would believe. That's why Health Engine so far is using only federated learning. Federated learning is anything that is compliant is only learned and everything else is not kept. Good thing with having an app or anything that exists on your smartphone as a standalone system is it could not do anything without your permission. Any permission-driven data also would only stay in the system within a select period until it has fed and told what it means. So once the meaning has been derived, the data is lost out of the system. We have no cloud, no interface where it is getting stored. So only permissible data, it is using federated learning and making sure no data is saved once preventive measures have been taken or some action has been already put into practice. Having said that, I know there would be privacy concerns, and we're also learning as we go on the types of data that we capture that could be potentially harmful or whatever. The only thing we've done as a company is made sure that we are not storing any data, the permissions part of it and not the storage. And I feel like with AI, you don't need to store as well, because once it has taken a decisive answer on what your supposed digital twin is, then that answer is already out and you don't need to save the markers, further feed that or keep that. So that's the instinct I'm trusting. And I can see the con of it as well. Sometimes you have to go back to data to feed more insights into the system or the AI to give it better results. That's a call that I've consciously taken, that there will be no data storage whatsoever.
So we've talked a lot. It's fascinating. I plan to have a lot more speakers in the near future, actually, who are experts in AI, because it's taking us by a storm. And I always tell people, even 5 years ago, I wouldn't be able to have this podcast, because even though it's not AI, most of it is generated by me. A lot of how it's powered and edited and on all sorts of stuff is by AI. And so if I wouldn't have the manpower to do all of that. So it's fascinating to me how much it's doing. It's also scary as well.
I can imagine what you're saying. And to be honest, Soma, I feel AI is that friend that if you've understood, can make it your best. If not, then it starts acting against you. But I think the good part, the initial success that I'm seeing with AI is so many single people companies where people who wouldn't believe they could start something of their own because of the manpower, the resources required. Now with AI, you can do lots by one person doing that and prompting it. Yeah.
That's exactly, aside from my social media manager, everything else is powered by AI. So it's fascinating, the world that we are in right now. We've talked about so much stuff, and I wish I could continue with this conversation for another hour. But is there something that we haven't touched upon that you absolutely wanted to discuss in this podcast?
No, I think we did touch on most things that I wanted to touch on, especially around like biomarker detection and the fact that some of the important hormonal journey trackers are something that are going to be part of our system, understand their bodies better and start listening to it, A, and B, using platforms such as ours, not necessarily ours, but in the times to come, I'm seeing how AI would be doing a lot in the field of fertility tech, hormonal tech, and just use different systems to make sense of what's happening, and then let the people who are experts, such as you, to come with guided conclusion on what needs to happen. So I think the world will eventually shift to a combination of from Google doctors to now AI doctors, but actually using AI to make sense of what's really happening, which is no longer jargonized or just a snippet of an information that Google gives.
Right.
I think that's where the world would transform.
I agree with you. I think we're living in fascinating times in terms of technology, but I am actually hopeful that this will move women's health forward in ways that we couldn't even imagine. And I'm talking positive ways. I do hope to continue my relationship with you going forward. If someone wanted to learn about you and find out more about your company, where would we find you?
I think the best place right now would be to go into our website and fill the contact form. You could also email us at care@healthengine.us. But for getting supposed answers on how they could be part of the system, I would just alert them to wait for another month and we'll have an expedited launch. I'm really working towards it and I'm so hopeful and passionate about it. But I'm just waiting to hit the nail correctly right now. And I would really want more people to be part of community once the launch happens, and probably that is the time that I would like to speak to you again and talk to people more about the community angle of things.
Thank you so much for being on this podcast. It was wonderful speaking with you and learning about your service. And I really wish you a lot of luck going forward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Soma. I really appreciate you taking the time to speaking with me and making sure that I get a voice about the thing that I'm building here.